7. Good evening, everybody. I'm Patrick Cummins. I'm the Executive Director for the Connecticut Audubon Society, and welcome to Young, Gifted, and Wild About Birds. This evening, we're going to spend an hour or so with Jenny Kroik. Jenny is an artist and illustrator based in Manhattan. For many years, she painted people as she watched them coming and going about in their daily lives, in big bookstores, in the subway, in museums, and on the street. When the pandemic started, she became interested in birds and began painting them as a way to help to learn how to identify them and get to know them better, which is actually a great technique. Sketching birds is a great way to get to learn them. This evening, she's going to show us and talk about her work for a half an hour or so, and then she'll do a demonstration for us, which I'm really looking forward to. We saw some sneak previews earlier, and it's going to be awesome. She told us that she's happy to take questions while she's doing this demo, so please feel free to use the chat function at that time or beforehand if you have questions along the way. Before I turn it over to Jenny, here are a few notes. As usual, we're going to be recording this evening's presentation, and we'll send you a link to the video soon afterwards. We do recommend that you use the speaker view for the best presentation experience. Everything will be the largest for you. You can select it in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Closed captioning is activated by default, but you can turn it off if you prefer in your settings. And again, please feel free to use the chat function to ask questions. And I'm hoping that we're going to have a nice interactive evening. But for now, I'm going to hand it over to Jenny. Thank you so much for joining us this evening, Jenny.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for coming and listening to my talk. As you heard, I am a painter and illustrator. I also teach art. I've been teaching for about 15 years or so, and I've been teaching on Zoom for about 2 years. So I have a little bit of practice talking on Zoom. Hopefully won't be any glitches. So I want to start by showing you guys a little bit about my work. So I'm just going to share my screen and share my website. So just to, if you don't know my work, I have done 3 covers for the New Yorker magazine. So here are the 3 that I've done so far. My work in general is based on observation and portraiture, and I paint a lot of people that I see on the street. Here is a magnified version of my first cover. Which was really based on me kind of wandering around. I love walking and I love being outside and I love exploring, which will tie into my love of birds in a minute. Part of my work was kind of noticing different stories in the streets, and one of them was this lady at the Strand, which ended up being my first New Yorker cover. So as you can see, a lot of my work is people watching and a little bit of kind of almost like bird watching. So I've been noticing sort of what people are doing and noticing the behavior and just kind of imagining the stories behind the people. And one of the series is I've done at some point, because I've noticed that I've been painting a lot of people with their phones, which is what you see in the street in New York. So I started changing their phones into animals. So here's one bird related before I was into birds, where I changed this lady's phone into the mandarin duck, which was a visitor to Central Park a couple of years ago. And all these other ducks are just a little bit jealous because she's, you know, holding the star, mandarin duck. So just showing you a little bit, you know, I do have a great love for nature, and I lived in Oregon for 8 years before I moved to New York City. So I definitely noticed birds and I knew that they were there, and I included them in my art. But it hasn't really sunk in the same way as in the last couple of years, where I've been really, really addicted to bird watching and really got into it. So just a little bit about, you know, as an illustrator, I also work for clients. So here's just a little sampling of my client work. So you can see I've done illustrations for the New Yorker online, and, you know, various types of things that I worked on. So I want to talk a little bit about how I got into birding. So let me take us to my slideshow. So as I mentioned, part of my work was really based on people watching. And as you know, during the pandemic with the lockdown, we were avoiding each other and we couldn't really people watch. And I started spending a lot of time outdoors and just walking and taking long walks. And I also lived in southern New Jersey for a while during the pandemic, which allowed me to be more, in nature. Although, I mean, New York City, as I'm going to talk about, also has a huge birding community. That's awesome. But I started my birding journey in South New Jersey. And this is me slightly elongated and more beautified with all the birds I used to see around New Jersey. And I have a very good friend named Annie Novak, and she's the one who pushed me into bird watching. So I started by taking long walks and kind of bird noticing, and I would talk to her about, love of nature, and she's a really big birder, and she kind of she sent me the Sibley's Guide, and then she encouraged me to buy binoculars, and we both love art, so we kind of connected over that as well. Here she is at the Metropolitan Museum, where we go to paint and draw together before the pandemic. And at some point, she just took me on this, what really clinched the bird obsession of mine is she took me on kind of a serious bird watching tour, the one where you get up at 4 a.m. and you go to an undisclosed place where, birders have already been standing there since dawn. And it was just a really interesting experience. So I was kind of thrown into this world of birding, which I didn't know about. And so this is her on our birding trip. And maybe you guys can identify some of the little birds that I dropped in the corners. So we have the Northern Harrier, and you guys can try and guess the other ones. And so this is the birding trip that I went to that really, flung me into birding. You might recognize some of these people. I don't know. It's not a big bird world, as I understand a lot of birders near each other. So this was in Cape May, and we went down and did the morning flight, which was really kind of, for somebody who has never been birding before, this was really kind of amazing, where I was just standing there kind of like, oh, I think I see a bird. And all these people were like, yelling up they were just like identifying these birds flying past. So I was very, very impressed and kind of like overwhelmed. And I was like, this is amazing. So this was my first birding trip that got me into birding. And I encountered things like this, where this was, now I see more of it as a birder, but I've never seen this before. This was a group of birders all looking for this one very rare bird that we all saw that day. And I think it was, let me double check, I looked it up earlier. It was a black-throated gray, I believe, which wasn't supposed to be in Cape May, and everybody was kind of pshing at the bushes and trying to get people out and trying to find the bird, and we did find it. So that was like kind of, oh, it's a hunt, So that was really fun to see. And then from that birding trip, I actually pitched an idea for, so I also create illustrated stories for the New Yorker, and I pitched this idea that never happened, but it was kind of a fun start to think about like creating art, where I started like pushing for more bird art for my personal artwork. So this was at the Hawk Watch, where we met this wonderful girl who was tending for an injured pigeon. She had her on her shoulder, so that was really sweet. And then I think this is also Annie's friend, Tom Johnson, who was birding there. So then I went home and tried it on my own, which was really kind of scary and weird. So I was like, okay, I'm going to look through the Sibleys and I'm going to find all these birds that we saw. And then, I went down this journey where it was like, I'm going to get it. I'm going to do it. So then I started sketching birds that I saw to try to memorize the shapes, and trying to memorize, areas where they were hanging out, and just kind of trying to find my footing in birding, and using my art knowledge to sort of try and do it and find my interest in it as sort of a visual person. So this is one of my first attempts to identify a bird just by sight. So this is before I figured out how to take some, blurry photos through my binoculars for identification purposes. Can anybody guess what this bird is that I was seeing? You guys can write.
Wood duck? No. Mm. Somebody said pintail in the chat. I thought maybe wood duck with that crest.
So this was supposed to be a long-tailed duck.
Oh.
So this is where I learned that like my visual memory isn't as good as I thought, and also drawing with your binoculars and your sketchbook is really, really hard. And I know some people do it, and I've seen some birders who are really great at, like, they have all these tricks. But this is kind of funny and this is fun. So I was like, okay, this is great to try and sort of, see what I think I saw, and, if it's from far away. So this was my attempt to identify a long-tailed duck. And other things that I would sketch is kind of the environment of the birds and their attitudes. And I was also thinking about like my presence with the birds, because that is a big thing I think about, as like us as humans interacting with birds, and me as an illustrator interacting with my subjects. That's also something I think about a lot. Like, am I intruding on the person? Is it okay that I paint them? So same thing with the bird, like, is this bird okay with me looking at it? Like, I really love it. Does it know that I love it? So there was sort of a relationship forming with these birds. So this is another one where you guys can try and guess. This was really a hard one that I saw in Fort Tryon Park after I came back to the city and kind of joined this like urban bird watching team. So I saw this bird and I was like going crazy and was like, what is it? What did I see? And it was in the rain and it was all fluffed up. So can anybody guess what bird I saw? And I was also sending it to my friend Annie, who was so great at, like, very gracious at, like, I was just asking her every day, like, what is this bird? What is this thing I saw? So she was very, very patient. So it's great if you're a beginner birder to have somebody who supports you, who is patient, who tells you, like, it's okay. Yes, it's a yellow bird. So does anybody have any guesses about this? So somebody's saying goldfinch. And then here I said it.
Western tanager.
Western tanager, that's another guess. Oriole, Sarah said Oriole. It, by the way, did not wear a fedora, but it could have had. I don't know, maybe. Any other guess? American goldfinch. Okay, so this is the full sketch. So just to show you sort of my kind of trying to use my knowledge, but then later I figured out it was a Baltimore Oriole, and I only know this because I've been birding in the same place for about a year and a half. So it's reappeared there. So I was like, oh, that's what it was. But for a long time, it was really driving me crazy. It was like, what is it, that thing that I saw? Okay, so other things I used to sketch, again, to help me with identification, is things like movement. So I've had a really hard time with turns last summer, and I really tried to get really good at turns. And I think these were common turns, but I was also trying to sketch sort of how they act, how they move, and hoping that would help me kind of memorize, their behavior. So, and again, also kind of part of the experience of falling in love with birding and the birds, and sketching them and kind of, thinking about them. And one thing that, as I mentioned, that really translated from, can you see the full thing? From my regular illustration practice to birding that really went well together is the narrative aspect. And I think, birds are so expressive And there's so many stories that come, with the birds, and so much literature and so many ways to think about birds in relation to us and the way we live. So I think, I really fell in love with that part of birding, as well as sort of the story. So this was actually from a trip to the Museum of Natural History in the city, and we just sort of sketched birds. And this was also interesting because I've been to this museum many times, and coming back as somebody who's been birding for a little bit and starting to recognize, the birds in the displays, that was really exciting. And then suddenly I was like, really felt like traveling everywhere. So I never really wanted to travel before I started birding. Now I want to see like all these interesting, cool birds. And here's another identification problem. This was a red-winged blackbird singing. And another part of, why I love birding is kind of, using humor. And there's a lot of sort of aspects in the birding community and in things that I see online. Sort of other different things are sort of kind of jokes and humor that's tied into birding. So this was my attempt to learn about sparrows, and it was really hard to learn about sparrows. So this is just another new sparrow that I've discovered. Let's see, what was I going to say a little bit more on that? Okay. So yeah, and then I've also, since I've been back in the city, I've also kind of got in touch with, learned about this kind of huge birding community that's in the city, especially online. So there's like a big Twitter thing where people post, birds they see on Twitter. And I thought this was also a really fun way to get like my followers to get excited about birds and conservation, and learning about birds in their environment, and just kind of getting people to look around and look at the birds. So this was Barry the barred owl, which some of you might know was an owl that lived for about 1.5 years in Central Park. And this was an owl that was very famous, and you could not keep his position secret because every single minute everybody had a camera on him. They knew where he is, and she is, sorry, it was a lady owl. And sadly, she died. I think she had lead poisoning, or she was struck by a vehicle, a park vehicle. But this was kind of also an interesting thing to learn about these urban birds. And people get really excited and really riled up. And I think this sort of, caused a lot of discussion about, why do we have so much lead, why do we have so much poison? Like maybe we should do something about it. Maybe this is bad for us. So I think there was a lot of discussion about that. So I wanted to also show a couple of sketches from my sketchbook that are just my regular sketching style, and to show kind of the narrative and different tricks that I use to kind of capture movement and shape very quickly. So if anybody's a sketcher out there and thinking about different ways to sketch on their own, one thing that I use is a brush pen. So I found that's a really good way to get really big shapes quickly. So I also use that when I'm in the field. And I also bring a minimum amount of color with me so I can remember color shapes. So color is a really hard, difficult thing for us to remember. So usually I'll have a couple of color tools. So this is really helpful for birding as well. So if you're out there and you see a bird you don't recognize, one thing that's good to immediately write down besides shape is also what colors do you remember, because colors, really float out of our minds really quickly. So you can do an experiment and go around and try to remember colors, and then come home like 5 hours later and see if you remember what colors you saw. So I always carry a little bit of minimal color palette with me. So I have a couple of Sharpies and markers in my purse at all times. And so here's a quick portrait from my sketchbook. We have, you know, again, thinking about the character and then thinking about the environment. So I usually don't use kind of the same tricks or, you know, tactics I use when I sketch people. The same thing when I look and sketch birds is I think about their posture, their gesture, what were they doing, you know, not just like the bird itself, but also, or the person itself, but also like everything around it. So I think, you know, adding details also helps remember birds, you know, and their behaviors, and also, you know, sketching people. So let's see, I'm just noticing a couple of things in the chat. So I actually have been to Maine, Susan, and I love it, and I can't wait to go back. And I've my friends went to see the eagle that's down there, and I was so jealous. The eagle that I forget what it was called, the one that flew, got lost from
Stellar's sea eagle.
yes, the stellar sea eagle. And I was like, I wanted to see it. So you guys are very lucky. You have a visitor. Okay, oops. So this is, I was showing, and it's on my desk too, so you can see it later. A couple of other things that I've done with sketching to help me memorize is also when I don't have my binoculars, when I don't have an ability to take a good photo. So some of you might not, you know, have the giant cameras, or but you still want to kind of remember or jot down or memorize. Sometimes I actually do this at the end of the birding trip of that day. So so I'll come home, I'll make a list of everything I saw, and then I'll come home and I'll draw it. So this is actually a trip to Boston I took with my sister, who is really bored with birding. So I was like, okay, I'm not gonna bring my binoculars because she's gonna be really mad if I stop in the middle and start looking at birds in the middle of our trip together. So I was just kind of noticing with my eyes and taking notes. And then at the end of the day, I would go back to our room, and I was just drawing all the different birds I saw on the trip. So that was a really fun way I found to kind of, you know, write things down. And here's one from Cape May. And I really love looking at ducks. And can anybody see my mistake from early birding? Who can find the mistake?
In the ducks?
Yes.
There's one mistake in the ducks.
What's that?
There's one mistake among the ducks.
Yeah.
There's a chicken, a water chicken.
The coot, right?
The coot, yeah.
The coot is not a duck, which later I was like, oh no, what have I done? I posted it, and all the bird people are gonna chastise me for this. So so yeah, I learn. You live and learn, so that's the good thing. The other thing I wanted to talk about birding is it's a really great way to connect with other people. So this is actually my mom and I have convinced my parents to draw bird cards with me, which was really fun. So we got to actually, and last week I took them birding. Last time I visited them, and they're really kind of set in their ways. So it's really fun that they enjoyed it, and we all kind of got to you know, get together and you know, do something that we all enjoyed. So this is my mom painting a blue jay, and this is me drawing a blue jay, and then I found out what it's called in Russian. And then this is a little tutorial of how to draw a bird for my dad that I do in the top right corner. And this is not a flattering picture of my dad, but I love it. And this is probably maybe one of the only times my dad painted. So this is really exciting. And I really love the way it came out. And this is my mom's bird, which she refused to finish, but hopefully she finished it by now. So this is really great. The other thing that is bird related in my practice is my connection with the Wild Bird Fund, which is on the Upper West Side. And if you guys haven't heard of it, it's a place that rescues birds and urban wildlife. So people bring in injured birds, and they're volunteer based, so they don't charge for their services. And this is my friend Jan Kingslake, who actually introduced me. She was a volunteer, and she fostered pigeons, and she introduced me to the Wild Bird Fund. And this is her with her 2 rescue birds that she had. And this is Rita, who's the director of the Wild Bird Fund. So I kind of got in touch with them, and they actually have a gallery in the front of their storefront. So they kind of have rotating little art shows. And this is kind of one of the first things I did when I came to the city, before I knew anybody and before I had any clients. So this was a really kind of cool way to get in touch with people in the city. And so they, here she is with some baby pigeons. And this is another volunteer, and this was Ben, their longest resident, the cardinal. And they have also a lot of pigeons that escape when people, buy them for food, and then they escape the trucks, and then they rescue them. So this is kind of interesting. This is another volunteer. She brought her ferret that day. So that was fun to illustrate. So this was one of my first shows in New York City, was actually bird related. So that was, that's kind of fun to include in this talk. And so I painted a lot of their patients. So these were all patients at the time. And while I was installing it, they had some gulls flying around outside their cages, and some of the gulls pooped on my art, which I thought increased its value. So, so that was, I was like, great, it's approved by the birds. They like it. And here's a different view. So you can see kind of the size of my original artwork is quite small. And this giant pigeon painting still hangs in my house behind me. So let's see. And actually, I want to just oh wait, actually, no, it is on my slideshow. So I'm just going to skip down to it. Another way that I snuck birds into my work. So this was a cartoon that I did for the New Yorker online in October. And I was really excited that I got to do it. And this was one of my favorite things that I did for the New Yorker. And this was also kind of related to my thoughts about, the state of birds and are they going to be okay? And this was my way of thinking, that birds are so great at the survival, that I'm hoping they'll outlive everything. And so this was my cartoon about future birds. So this was the temporal warbler that travels back in time to a 19th century garden. And I had a Freon-rumped eider. Is it eider or eider? What's the correct pronunciation?
Eider.
Eider. That creates its own ice sheets, because there's no more ice in the world. So it just makes its own ice. And we had a lead-backed sparrow that can hunt in hurricanes. And I had a robotic hummingbird that does not need to eat. It just hangs out. We actually had a hummingbird in our local park this summer in Fort Tryon Park. And I still don't know if it made it to down south, because it stayed so late, and it was it looked like it had a little lump, but it was like a famous hummingbird. There were people coming all over from, South Brooklyn. There was this woman who'd come every day on the bus with a giant camera, just waiting for the hummingbird to come out and do its rounds. So I fell in love with the hummingbirds and I wanted to give them a break. So this is my imaginary future for the hummingbirds, where they can finally relax. And nuclear winter plumage, and then finally the interstellar albatross, which flies into space and does whatever it wants. So this was my New Yorker cartoon about future birds. And another thing that I actually, I'll start with this one, that I started doing, and are there any questions so far that I, just looking at the chat real quick. Okay, so there was a question about my medium, so I'm gonna talk about that. And you can see actually with this slide, and you're gonna see on my desk, I use gouache and sometimes watercolor, but mostly gouache for my illustration style. So this is something I started doing recently, where I it's a little bit of, I guess you can say, bird stalking, where I go on eBird, and whenever I send somebody a letter or real mail, I'll see where they are in the world or in the country, and I'll see which birds are around them, on the hotspots near their address. And this is really fun for me because I get to see birds that I might not see, and I kind of get excited about where they are and I want to go visit them. So this is something I'm doing, and I'm actually going to show one today. But this was funny because I post kind of half finished paintings on my stories on my Instagram. Excuse me. And then I ask people, what do you think this bird is? And sometimes I'll do like a bird quiz and, send the winner some postcards. And one time as a joke, I posted this, and I said, what is this? Because I didn't think anybody was going to guess, but lots of people actually guessed what this bird is. So let's do a little quiz here. Can anybody guess which bird this is? So we get owl, barn owl, barn owl, owl, barn owl, snowy owl. Anything else? Any other guesses? So you guys were right about owl. It's not the owls you guessed, but let's see if so we have a screech. Any other owl guesses? Horizontal barn. So here's the answer. So it was a short-eared owl. And there were a couple of birders on my Instagram that guessed it, and I was just amazed that they could guess the species from this like little outline. So this is kind of what I do. I'll just go on eBird, I'll look for birds around it, and this is a bird I've never seen before. So for me, it's also kind of like if you painted, they will come. So maybe if I painted, I will, somehow get the birds to come out. Okay, so here's some more Instagram shenanigans where I created some memes for my birds, and we already looked at this. And here is just a quick screenshot of all I really got into this postcard sending, and as you can see, these are all the postcards I send just in a couple months. So I have really enjoyed doing this. And we have I had some friends in Israel, so there were a couple of Israeli birds, and there's a Russian bird, and there's some birds from the Midwest, and various places where I sent postcards to. So that was fun, really fun to do. Someone asked me to go back to Bernie. So this was, you've probably seen this meme, it's old now. So this was just the meme where they took the photo of Bernie sitting, was it at the inauguration, I think, with the mittens, and then they just put him in different places. So this was a barred owl that we had, not the famous barred owl. This was a different barred owl in Inwood Park last year. So I was, got into it. Okay, so let's see. I'm going to skip that. And I just want to quickly mention that I mentioned the Wild Bird Fund, and actually, if you do follow me on Instagram, or if you follow my work, you might see hopefully soon. And I can't talk about it for before it's out, but I am working on a story that hopefully will come out soon, that will be related to hopefully raise awareness on bird collisions. And my friend Annie also is on the board of American Bird Conservancy, ABC. She also helped me with the story, so that that is coming soon. And just this is just a fun thing where one follower on my Instagram guessed one of my quiz answers. So I sent her a bird postcard, and then she made me these owl earrings and sent them to me, which was like so cool. So it's kind of fun, you know, the weird, unexpected things that come out for a shared love of birds. And just our local red-bellied woodpecker that I see every day. And yeah, I went from, you know, not knowing anything about birds. And then after 2020, I just got so obsessed with it. This is what my phone looks like now. It's just 90% pictures of birds. And I go out almost every day. I have my binoculars. It's hard for me not to bring my binoculars with me because I think I might see something somewhere. So, so I always have those with me. And I would just want to end with this slideshow, and then I'll go back to other things. We have a really large park in Inwood, and there's an owl. I like to go visit there sometimes, but the park is very large and empty and a little creepy. So while I walk in the park, I invented, you know, I write some lyrics to myself, so I'm not as worried about walking in the park. So there was, this is about my favorite owl of the season, which is the great horned owl. And I named him Marty. So there was an owl named Marty who threw a one hoot of a party. He said, "I don't care, I'm inviting the bear, even though he's pervy and farty." So this is what I do when I am creeped out by a park that's not maybe super safe. So yeah. Okay. Oh, thank you for Chris for writing my Instagram handle on the chat, so you guys can see that there. And then one other thing I wanted to talk about. Okay, so now you guys are switched to my desk. And I'm going to draw a bird for you guys. And while I draw, so first I'm going to just explain what I'm doing, and then I'm going to go into rendering. So, and while I render, you guys can ask questions. So you can prepare your questions. And these are my sketchbooks, so you can see them kind of in person. And this was also in New Jersey, where I sketched. There were a lot of snowy egrets, and just showing a little bit of what it looks like, you know, not in the slide. And just kind of, you know, minimal, like little details. And a lot of times I'll start with a pen line, which is what I'm going to do now. And the reason I do it this way is it also stops me from getting too obsessed about details. And what I like to do is, oops. So I might just actually show you. Actually, I'm just looking up a hotspot in on eBird, and I'm on the, there is actually a hotspot for Chernobyl. So I was hoping to paint some birds from Ukraine and send them to people who donate money to, you know, different organizations to, you know, help, you know, what's happening there. So that's kind of my next project, but I am going on eBird to find various birds. And this is actually really interesting to look at it from that perspective when you think about, you know, the ecological, you know, toll of war, as well as the horrible human toll. But yeah, it's actually was really interesting for me to find that there is a hotspot in Chernobyl. The last logged is October, so it might be different now. But looking at various birds, and I'll take you guys to it so you can see what I'm doing. If anybody has a request. So we have missile thrush. That sounds, ooh, that's cool. Okay, I'm gonna do that one. Sorry. I decided for you. So I picked the thistle thrush, which I'm going to draw. And so these are not for sale, and because stuff that I use from other people's photography, I can't really resell. So I'm just, these are just for fun usually. And somebody asked me about photographs, and I do take my own photographs of people and I combine it with sketches that I do. And if it's for a job, then I will change the person a little bit, because I just, I think it's, my agent says it's fine, I can do it, but I just feel bad to use people for, if it's for my own work, like it's just, here's a person I saw, then it's, I don't feel too bad about it. So what I'm doing now is I'm just creating an outline using a pen of Faber-Castell artist pen. So it's waterproof once it's dry. And I have the picture in front of me, which will help me because I have no idea what this, European bird looks like, because I've never seen it, but it actually looks a lot like our thrush, is just a little bit more elegant. I mean, elongated, that's the word I was looking for. And so you can see I'm kind of like, not too worried about mistakes. And a lot of times when I do this, I don't leave enough room for a tail. This happens to me a lot. So what I do then is I take another piece of paper and I'll cut out a small piece and I'll just add to the bottom, so that way I can. This literally happens to me every time. So a lot of people get these postcards with, with an extra piece. Yes, I am left-handed. That is correct. So after I create an outline, and I usually don't spend too much time on it. And, when I draw a bird, a lot of times I'll also like read about it, and I want to look at the range and make sure that, I know a little bit about the bird. So this is also kind of a fun way to get to know birds that I've never seen before. So I'm going to move these guys over and I'll show you my paints. So I might not need all these paints, but I will, hopefully you guys can see. Yeah, okay. So I have my water container and some brushes. And I'm going to mix a little bit of color on the palette. So this bird is kind of gray on the back and maybe has some hints of brown. So I'll add a little bit of red. And so I'm using gouache, which is a opaque watercolor. And it's going to dry a little bit lighter. You can add layers on top of it. So if you make a mistake, it's really easy to fix. So that's a really fun thing about the gouache paint. And I actually, when I started painting, I started with watercolor, and I studied with a woman who was, taught me in a very traditional way, where you're like not allowed to use a hair dryer or anything, or you can just paint in a very traditional watercolor style, which was really helpful. But then it was also very liberating to learn about gouache when I was in college, because you can combine kind of a more traditional watercolor technique, but then you can also make mistakes, and that's okay. So the thing about painting also is that you have to wait for it to dry. So while I do that, sometimes I'll start another one, so I can do two simultaneously. And if anybody has, if you know a Ukrainian bird or a European bird that you like me to paint, I can also do that. But also, this is a good time to ask me questions, since it's getting close up there. So if you guys, so there's a question about paper. So the paper I'm using is a hot press watercolor paper, and I think this is 150 weight. And hot press is a little bit smoother, not as textured as cold press, which is the traditional watercolor paper. So this is cold press. I don't know if you can see, there's a bit more texture. And so let's see, we have a few requests. So Eurasian region, ooh, that sounds interesting, and the jackdaw. So let's see what these look like. White stork is Ukraine's national bird. Oh, interesting. Oh, I thought it was the nightingale, but maybe that's something different. Let's see what other questions we have. Such a good, oh, so that's a good question about sense of movement. And it's related kind of to what I'm doing now. So right now I'm working from photos, which tends to actually hinder a little bit the sense of movement in an artwork, which is why it's really important to keep a sketchbook. So I will balance between using a photo, which helps me get more, you know, accurate or precise, or get something that is hard to get when you are just, you know, using your imagination, or from, you know, something that is, you know, that moves or disappears. So it's good to use photos, but also constantly sketching really helps your hand and helps understand movement. So going to figure drawing is really helpful, or just sitting in a cafe and drawing people walking by is helpful for gesture, or draw, you know, animals walking by if you prefer to draw something, and sort of not worrying too much about getting it right. And then for that, like using tools that help you make, you know, stay away from getting too detailed. So this is why I use the brush pen a lot when I sketch outdoors. So the brush pen is almost like a brush, and it's very gestural. So the tools you pick for sketching really change the way you think about movement. So bigger tools. So even sketching with a brush can help you get more movement in your painting. Sketching with like really big charcoal, or, you know, kind of a chunky pencil or something like that. Yeah, so hopefully that helps. So let's look at what people ask for. So let's look at the Eurasian widget. So, oh, it's so cute. Oh, I think there was one in Bush Terminal in the city a while ago. Somebody reported it, and I tried to find it, but the whole thing was blocked off, so I couldn't see it. But they're very cute. So let's draw a widgeon. And oops, so I'm gonna use my marker and doing the same thing. So while I did that and talked, you can see that this dried, which is great. And sometimes I'll let things dry overnight. So patience, that's the other two parallels between birding and art, is the patience element. If you develop, so kind of developing patience is really crucial to both of those things. And so widgeon is kind of has a little funny cheek, and this head is a little bit more square, and he's got really beautiful different textures. So this is the beginning of a widgeon. So I'm going to render this first. Any other questions from you guys that I can answer? So yeah, painting is all about layering, adding more layers on top. As you can see with gouache, you can make things lighter and fix things. So like if you need to add an eye ring or a highlight, or if you made like a line go too far out, you can take a lighter, more, you know, less water and more paint, and then you can kind of correct it. So that's a really nice thing about gouache. And my favorite thing is once it's, you know, nice and dry, is you can really go in with a smaller brush and you can really add like all the super nice details on top. So this was our missile thrush. So I'm going to write it before I forget. So missile thrush. Okay, we have one more question from Tom. Is getting the color right something you learned or is it instinctive? So color is definitely something I've learned. I used to paint very monochromatic and I actually had to force myself to get more bold with my color choices. I look at a lot of color theory, and also actually being a teacher really helps because then you can, you know, you start explaining things and then you try them yourself. And so yeah, I try to think about, you know, complementary colors and trying to use really weird color combinations I've never tried before, just to see how it goes and not to get too comfortable with my drawing choices, because it's really easy to kind of fall into just doing the same thing. And yeah, and then it's, you know, I also, a lot of times I love painting by hand. It all ends up in you know, being scanned in the computer. So that kind of adds a little extra layer of comfort, because then if something goes wrong, I can always, you know, tweak it in Photoshop. So that's kind of the nice thing about being both analog and digital. But I do love the, you know, physical paints, and I love, you know, having a palette and seeing the colors being mixed. That's like kind of my favorite thing about art is the color play. So this is our widgeon, and we have a missile thrush. Cool. Let's see, are there any other questions? Am I going over time? Should I keep painting?
We have a little bit more time.
All right, so I will, let's do a weird background for this widgeon. So I mentioned color theory. So complementary colors are colors that are opposite each other on the color wheel. So that's really helpful to know. And that's something I use a lot. So this widgeon has some orange in him. So does anyone know the complementary color of orange? Blue, correct. You guys are great at art. You get an A. So we have a little bit of blue. So I'm going to make that the background of this widgeon. So the complementary color makes the other color really pop, especially if it's less saturated. So if this orange is really, really bright, and then I put kind of a softer, you know, more grayer type blue in the background, that's going to make my widgeon really pop, which is what I'm doing now. So I know you can see a little bit of reflection there. So hopefully once it's dry. So here's our widgeon, he's floating around. Also, while it's wet, this is a really good time to add some washes. So since he's in the water, this is a male, I'm assuming, right? Can correct me if I'm wrong. I'm guessing with the full orange. Does anyone know if this would be a male?
Yes, it's a male.
Thank you. Yeah, and then I find the one thing that I found really kind of interesting about birding is this idea that I only felt this way when I started meditating, is that you suddenly find a lot of interesting things in something that you thought there was nothing there. So that's sort of very exciting, where like I've never known that there's so many birds around me. So same thing when I was, you know, meditating, and you notice, you know, you focus on the boredom, or you focus on your thought, and you're like, wow, there's so much inside this moment where, you know, I didn't know it was there. So it's also a very meditative kind of activity, which I really like. That and art both are very mindful, can be mindful activities. which is both things I love about these two things. Okay. So oh, thank you for posting my website. And did I skip any questions? I know some of you asked questions earlier, but I may have not noticed. So this is a good time to ask me anything you want to know.
Might have another minute or so for questions.
Or we can just watch me paint.
Well, it is getting close to time to wrap up. So that was really a great presentation. I really enjoyed it a lot. It was fun and interesting. I wish we had time for more, because watching the process is just fascinating to me. It's something so foreign, because I can't do art myself. I can't draw, at least, or paint. You can see Jenny's work on her website, which is jennykroik.com. You'll see that link in the chat, and we'll be sending it out also with the recording, and that's JENNYKROIK, all one word, and then .com. And you can also follow her on, what's that?
I was going to say, if you follow me on Instagram, I'll probably post the finished postcards on my stories, so you can see the finished.
J Kroik. It's all one word, JKROIK. And we'll send you these links again. I think somebody may have posted that earlier in the chat. We can try to post it again. Jenny, thank you so much again. That was really great. I really enjoyed your artwork. It's just all of it, regardless of subject matter. I like the aesthetics of it. Thank you all for being part of the presentation and for supporting Connecticut Audubon's conservation work. It's an incredibly exciting time for conservation in Connecticut, and Connecticut Audubon Society is at the forefront of all of it. And when I say we're accomplishing a lot, I mean you, our members, our supporters. You help us. You inspire us. We wouldn't be able to get anything done without you. So everything that the Audubon Society accomplishes, think of it as a personal accomplishment of yours if you're a supporter in any way. Please don't forget the final two presentations that are coming up on Young, Gifted, and Wild About Birds. If you haven't signed up, you can do so already at ctaudubon.org/YGW. And thank you all again, and have a great evening.
Thank you. Bye.